Geocachomaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Well, welcome to episode 290. Yes, that's 10 away from 300 if you're doing math in your head. Welcome to the GeoGearHeads. I am Chris of the Northwest, along with our illustrious host, Daryl W4.
Hey, we're good to be back, even though I left myself muted for a moment there.
So literally, my introduction took words away from you. You couldn't speak. You were speechless.
Yes. I expected you to be a little bit more verbose in your.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, I think I just got used to the introductions on caching in the Northwest for the land monkey.
Some say.
Yeah, some say we all wish we could be the land monkey to get those wonderful, creative introductions every week.
Oh, I have a lot of fun. You know, I've only had about 3 good sessions of coming up with introductions for him. But when I get on a roll, I can come up with hundreds of them. It seems I'm strange. What can I say? Yeah,
but how many of those actually came from listeners?
None. I've never gotten a land monkey intro from a listener.
Ooh. Well, I think hopefully now you'll start getting some. And
send in your land monkey intros.
Yes. Anyway. We're talking today about road caching with another Chris. So we have too many Chris's on the show. There's 2, so that's too many.
You can never have too many Chris's.
No, two is too many. 1 is one many. 2 is too many.
Oh. All I know, Chris, is we must have had incredible parents to come up with such a great name.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always indicative of good parenting is if you can name your child something that is other than Daryl.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Daryl's not a good name. Don't ever use it.
I was gonna say, have there ever been 2 Daryls on this show, Daryl, or has that ever happened?
I don't believe we have. I've run into other Daryls, and no one spells it the same way. Everyone always spells it differently than what I have. So no one ever spells my name right ever.
Yeah, I can see that.
Well, yes, you do because you're well practiced in it now.
Oh, thank you. And Chris, of course, your name is spelled properly.
It is, yes.
No K's, and you add an H. That's the proper way to do it.
That's right.
All other guesses are wrong.
Exactly.
Everyone's going to, I'm sure, recognize Rock Chalk, Chris Ronan, who's normally during the day working over at this funny little lily pad place. But today we're going to be talking.
Going to catch on one day.
Really? You think so? Yeah, working on lily pads?
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Daryl, I have to interrupt for just a moment. Limax says there were 2 Daryls on the Newhart show.
Oh, that's right. There were. Did they ever say how they spelled their name? I don't remember if they did.
No. I'm Larry. This is my brother Daryl. This is my other
brother Daryl.
I get that comment quite often because one of my buddies is Larry.
Oh, really?
Gosh, that's perfect.
Yes. So
you should change your caching name to the other brother Daryl.
No, I'm just the brother Daryl. The other guy is the other brother.
Oh, too funny.
Oh my. But anyways, today we're going to be talking about Chris's journeys and adventures, independent sometimes, probably most of the time, from geocaching.com. So first off, let's mention some of those countries that you've actually gone caching in outside of North America.
Oh gosh, I might even have to look it up.
Well, I had to do that.
Canada is easy.
Yeah, Canada. Canada doesn't count because you're too close. That's just like another state.
Actually, I think I went to Mexico before I went to Canada. So I think Mexico was my first other country. Then Canada, Sweden, Denmark, Brazil, Germany, France, Austria, Liechtenstein, Italy, and Switzerland. And a lot of those were in the same trip. It would have been Germany, France, Austria, Liechtenstein, Italy, and Switzerland were all during one 10-day period last year. The others have generally been one-off trips, except for Sweden and Denmark. I did those together too.
Wow. And it's just impressive because I think that's like 6 times as many countries as I have.
I have Canada.
Canada,
well,
that's all I have.
It's funny, as you talk to people that live in Europe, that 12 is nothing. I mean, they're used to doing a couple dozen almost as a minimum.
Oh yeah.
So, but yeah, here in the U.S., getting more than 2 or 3 is a big deal because it takes a lot of planning and resources to be able to do it usually.
Yeah, during or throughout most of the U.S., just traveling between states is a much bigger chore than it is traveling between countries in Europe.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when I did Mexico, I had gone to the Yuma Mega event. This was before I started working at HQ, and I noticed, gosh, that's awfully close to a border crossing. So that might be interesting. So I drove from Yuma down to, is it Los Algodones? I think that's the name. Somebody's going to correct me, but it's only like, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes drive from Yuma, and parked my car and walked across the border and found 2 caches and walked back, and it took me all of about 20 minutes. And it was funny. When I walked in, it was just an open door. Nobody was there to check you or anything. You just walk across, and I did what I had to do, and I came back, and then you wait in line, to go through U.S. Customs. And of course they asked, do you have anything to declare? And I'm like, dude, I was just there for like 10 minutes. I found 2 geocaches. I have nothing.
Did they actually know what geocaches were?
I think that guy did actually. Now that
okay.
now that I'm remembering the experience, but yeah, thankfully there were a couple that were super close to the crossing, so you didn't have to, you didn't need a car or anything. You could easily walk to and back. So yeah, pretty sure that was my first international cache, and then Canada, and then well, come to think of it, I think then Brazil would have been the next one after that, before the European ones.
Interesting. So you didn't get to Europe before Brazil?
No,
So Brazil was your first trip off of the North American continent.
That's right. Yeah, it was. I went there June of last year.
I was going to say it was recent.
Yeah,
it was. It was just over a year ago, and then in the fall, I went over to Europe to go to GeoCoin Fest in Germany. And then while I was there, I did those other countries that I mentioned. And then this year, Denmark and Sweden, back in, I think, April. So yeah, Brazil was the first non-North American international stop for me.
Nice.
Well, Team Maviju in the chat is kind of reminding us that Australia is probably the worst, because Australia, you can't hit any other countries on the same continent.
Yeah, that's true. Australia has it pretty rough.
Yeah.
I mean, in that one particular thing. Otherwise, Australia has it pretty awesome.
Yeah, at least in North America, we have 3 countries. Australia has 1 country.
That's true.
Right.
That's true. That's one of those places that as you guys, I'm sure, probably have experiences. You've maybe gone to places before you started caching, and Australia was one of those for me. We spent a couple weeks in Australia years and years ago before. I'm trying to think if it was after geocaching began, but it was before we started caching. So it gives me an excuse to hopefully go back someday.
Limax brings up an interesting point. He says, so is Antarctica, but does Antarctica actually have actual countries?
I don't think so.
Because it's not a country on its own, though it probably registers as a country on geocaching.com stats, because it's not going to be any country, I don't think.
I think that's correct.
So I think it is its own country. So yeah, probably. But you have all those
considered that.
science stations down there, which are from different countries. So I don't know how that actually works. That's an interesting question.
I believe the science stations claim the ground that they're on for their native countries, but they can't claim that much.
It's neutral territory. Yeah,
it's neutral territory. Yeah.
Yeah. And he says it's kind of hard to drive in Antarctica as well.
Not if you have a dog sled.
It might still be kind of tough to do it even then.
Oh, that's true. Chris, you'd mentioned that you hit several countries when you were in Europe. Was that a goal or was that a happy accident?
It was mostly, I'd say it was kind of a goal. I mean, when you're in Germany, actually when you're in anywhere in Europe, I mean, it's pretty easy really to plot a day or two and easily go through a few different countries. Like for instance, when I was in, Geo CoinFest last year was in Berchtesgaden, which is literally just, I don't know, I think it was maybe a 20 minute drive into Austria from Berchtesgaden. So bang, there's two countries. And then later in the week, I was in Munich, and it's an easy drive to go down to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. I mean, it was a very reasonable day trip. And then another day I was in Munich, and I was caching with somebody, and I told him that I really all I wanted to do that day, and my only intention when I woke up that day was to, I wanted to do one of the technical tree caches, where you actually have to hoist yourself up and all that stuff. I wanted to do one of those, and I wanted to do a rappelling cache over a wall. And that's all I wanted to do. I woke up that day, I thought that's all we were going to do. And as we had those done by maybe noon, and then he said, "Have you ever been to Italy?" And I said, "No." "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, do you want to go to Italy? Do you want to find a cache there?" And I said, because I had no idea. I mean, how much time are we talking, or how many miles is this? And he's like, "Oh no, I mean, it's an easy drive to go to Italy from wherever we were." And I said, "Okay, I mean, you're driving, it's your car. If you want to go to Italy, let's do it." So sure enough, a couple hours later, we had dipped into Italy and found a few caches and made our way back to Munich that night. So yeah,
as easy as we think of jumping over a state border to grab that other state,
it has
in Europe.
Yeah,
you're doing that with countries.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly has that feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, even, I mean, I'm trying to think now. When I was there last year, I mean, even if a lot of people don't want to drive, they want to take the train to go wherever. Mm-hmm. And that makes it a little bit more time consuming, but it's pretty easy to plot out plans to take the train if you want to do it that way, and get some countries that way too. I mean, my style of caching really isn't to, let's see how many countries I can get in a day. I mean, I wanted to visit a couple of countries, but I didn't want it to be, let's just spend 10 minutes in Switzerland and then 10 minutes in Liechtenstein and whatever. So I felt like in a day, I could easily spend a few hours, or I don't know, 4 or 5 hours in each place. For me, Liechtenstein, I mean, I spent 4 or 5 hours there, and then I spent a few hours in Switzerland, and I had started the day in Germany. So, and that was a day that worked out pretty well.
It reminds me, earlier in the year, the geocaching blog did an article on a group of fellows who called themselves Geo Trip 17. They did 15 European countries in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
It takes some planning, but it's doable.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to watch comments on a story like that, because there's some people that say, oh, they're not even enjoying anything. They're just barely spending any time in any of these places. And I guess I can see that argument, but to each their own. And if you want to do that, then whatever. But yeah, I know it took a lot of planning, and I think here in the States, you get folks that want to see how many states they can do in a day, and same kind of a deal depending on where you are. That can be like when I lived in Kansas, that was it was pretty easy to be able to plan out to do, well, gosh, you could do Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota. I think I did that combination a couple of times, and it's not all that hard. So, but if you're here in Washington, where you and I are, Chris, I mean, yeah, you'd have a hard time doing much more than Oregon, Washington, maybe Idaho. I mean,
yeah.
Beyond that, it's just going to get crazy.
You could do Washington, Idaho, Montana really easy, because
yeah,
Idaho's so small in there. Or you could hit, the corner there of Washington, Idaho, Oregon. Beyond that, yeah, that's a pretty good trip.
Yeah.
So you could do Washington, Oregon, California in a day. Yes. I don't know if you'd make a return trip, but you could definitely get down there. You could probably return.
You might even be able to do Washington, Oregon, Nevada, California.
Yeah.
In a day. I don't know that I'd want to, but
right. It would be a lot of travel.
Yeah, it would.
Chris, okay. You mentioned something, and I'm not going to let you get past this. You said you woke up one morning and your only goal was to do a technical tree climb and rappel. Now, I assume you're traveling and you didn't bring your own climbing gear.
That was a really interesting time. So I was over there for GeoCoin Fest, and I was also there with Brian Roth and with Annie Love, who you guys might know, and we went out with a guy who lives there in Germany that we're familiar with, and he has all the gear, the climbing, the ropes, the hooks, everything you need, and he had this cache in mind that he wanted to take us to. That, come to think of it, I think it actually may have been on the Austria side. I'm not sure if it was in Germany, but we drove from Berchtesgaden, and it was on a very steep rocky hillside, and so you started at the top and you rappelled down maybe 15 feet to this hole in the rock face, and you could get the cache and then continue rappelling down to the ground. And I forget how far it was total, but anyway, we all get up there, and Annie right away says, I'm not doing it. I'm having nothing to do with this. And Brian and I were both like, well, no, we definitely want to do this. So Brian gets into the stuff, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I think Brian would be okay with me saying this. I've never seen, I mean, his eyes were just so wide. He was standing there over the side, and you could just taking deep breaths, just like, and off he went. He went over and, made his way down, got the cache, and then continued on down. And then I got into the stuff, and I got to the edge, and I looked over and I said, I can't do it. And the guy we were with said, hey, if you don't feel comfortable, then don't do it. I said, okay, well, I'm not comfortable. So I got out of it and walked back down to the bottom, and we went on with the rest of our evening. And as the evening went on, I was just feeling so much regret over not doing it. I thought, oh gosh, I really should have done that. And so I emailed our friend and said, hey, because we were going to meet up again a couple days later. I said, I'd really like to do something like what we did, or what Brian did. And so we went to a different spot, and this time I did do it. But I don't know that I would do it again. I mean, it was the tree was a totally different experience for me, because for me, as long as I can put my hands, I can touch the tree in front of me and work on hoisting myself up a little bit, and then touch the tree and then hoist myself up. But there's something about going backwards over a wall. And not being able to, it was not as comfortable for me. So yeah, we started that day. We started with the tree one, and then later did the wall. And so I was able to kind of, I don't know, in my mind, make up for the fact that I chickened out the first time. But Brian, man, I've got some great pictures of that one. He was awesome.
Visibly frightened. Yet
there's a fine line between fright and excitement, and he was he was straddling the line.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a trooper about it. So Annie and I both said, nope, it's not for us.
Chris, have you done any rock climbing, any rappelling before this?
Nope.
So this was your first experience. Oh yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, that was my first experience, and there's just, even now I'm thinking about it, it just gets me a little bit jittery. It's it just wasn't my scene.
Well, we should probably take the opportunity to remind people that the Rock Chalk name has nothing to do with rock climbing.
It really doesn't, despite the fact that most people out here think it does. No, I don't mind, free climbing. I mean, I've done some of that, and I've done some pretty difficult scrambling, but when ropes are involved, and it's just not my thing.
Okay, because I know you've done this, Cash. It's on my watch list. You did Tunnel of Fun in Oregon, which is off the road.
Right, the one that's right off the highway?
Yeah, right off the highway. You actually go back under the highway.
Right.
So was that anything like?
No.
No. Okay, because your feet were on the ground the whole time. There's a cable to hold on to.
Yeah, tunnel. Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, that's not even. Yeah, as long as it's dry.
I just had to ask.
Yeah, as long as it's dry, I wouldn't worry too much about that one in Oregon. It's pretty reasonable. It looks a lot worse than it is. Like my wife got some great pictures that make it look like I'm sitting on a wall I'm just about to fall off a huge cliff or something. And yeah, the truth is, as long as it's dry, you have a pretty reasonable little walk down to this opening, and then you just have to hoist yourself up into the opening, and it's not too big of a deal.
I stopped there. I was going to do it, and my wife approached me the only time in our marriage, our 26 years of marriage, if she ever said, "Chris, don't do this. I don't want to be a widow."
That's funny.
Okay, I'm going to honor you on this one. I really want it, and I felt there were way too many people there anyway to do it effectively.
That it's funny because it is right next to a pullout, and so people are stopped there, and it's a beautiful view of the ocean. Nobody looked at me. I did the whole thing, and I kept thinking I was going to have a bunch of people staring at me as I was walking down this weird hillside and then hoisting myself up into a tunnel. Not a single person looked over at me. It was the craziest thing. So,
I could have done it then. Just come back when you have, some ropes or something. Okay. So, anyway, I had to ask about that one. That's on my bucket list. Tunnel of Fun.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, Brazil, I know you had a ton of great stories because you talked about that one on Geocache Talk episode 7. So we'll include the link there so people can check up with it. But that's not the only country you've been to where it's not English native speakers. And English is a primary language. So how do you deal with the language differences?
Well, for me, Brazil was definitely the most difficult place in terms of finding other people that spoke English. Now, what I did have in Brazil was there was a geocaching volunteer who lives there who was with me the whole time that I was I was there. So, and he speaks English, so he was able to translate for me whenever there was an issue with a language barrier. And then for people that go to try to do the ape cache in Brazil, which is why I was there, the Junior, who is the owner of most of the caches at Intervales, the site of the ape cache, and he owns. Actually, he's now the official owner of the ape cache too. Junior speaks English as well. So once you get to Intervales, it's chances are that you'll be able to find some English speakers there. But Brazil was certainly the most challenging place with that. But then when you're in Europe, for instance, certainly in Denmark and Sweden, where I was earlier this year, so many people speak English, especially the younger people. They learn it in school, most of them. So it is not at all difficult to find English speakers. It was a little more difficult in certain parts of Germany, and then France. It was a little more difficult when I was there.
They don't like the Americans.
I remember the only day that I drove when I was there for GeoCoinFest, it was one day that I had stayed in Munich, and I drove down and did Liechtenstein and Switzerland, and there was a border crossing into Switzerland, and it was the only time the whole trip where I actually had somebody check my passport. And so I stopped the car, and I always try to at least be able to say hello and ask some rudimentary questions in the language of the country that I'm in, just because I feel like if you can show that you're making an effort, it tends to it tends to endear you to some people. And it didn't endear me though to this border guard, because I stopped and I rolled down my window and he just looked at me. He didn't even say anything, and I said, "Sprechen Sie English?" And he said, "You are not in England." And just, I'm like, okay. Said, I'm aware I'm not in England. That's what I'm thinking. I said, "You want to see my passport?" And he just nods his head real slowly, and I showed him my passport, and he waved me along. So that was the only moment in the whole trip, in any of my trips to other places to go geocaching, where I've had a little bit of a nervous twinge. But other than that, the only other issue has been, like, for instance, if I'm using the app and the cache page is in the foreign language, and usually you can I could copy and paste. If I really needed to read a hint or read a description, I would copy and paste it into Google Translate and be okay. There are certain, like when I was in Sweden and Denmark, most of the cache pages were in multiple languages. So there was a lot of cache pages that were in English, which really helped. But when I was in Germany and Austria, not nearly as many. So I remember being in Austria. I remember when I went to Berchtesgaden, I flew into Munich, took a train to Berchtesgaden, and actually bypassed Berchtesgaden and went into Strasbourg, Salzburg, on the Austria side, just to get an Austria cache. And I thought, I'm just going to get off the train real quick, find at least one cache, and I DNF like the first two or three. And part of the reason was I couldn't read the hints. I didn't have data or something, so I couldn't translate anything, and it was all in German, and I had a heck of a time. So it took me, I think it was my fourth cache before I finally found one that was easy enough where I didn't need the hint, and I was able to. And then the stupid thing was, 2 days later, me and Brian and Annie and our friend all drove back to Austria to do a couple caches, so I wouldn't even have needed to do that stupid little stop that I made on my way in. So,
well, you never know. You got to get them when you can.
Oh, that was my thought too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in retrospect, it was kind of silly.
You bring up another good point, data. Did you have data while you were traveling, or did you load everything, say, at a hotel on Wi-Fi, and then go out for the day and hope for the best?
I usually rely on, or I prefer to have everything loaded before I go out. That's kind of how I prefer to do it. But, depending on your cell provider, like I use AT&T, and they have a pretty good deal where it's, I think, $10 a day to basically use your same data plan that so if you have, if you get, I don't know, 10 gigabytes a month, it just draws on that 10 gigabytes while you're in the other country for an extra $10 a day. So, which is kind of it's to me worth it just to not have to worry about beyond geocaching. I mean, I think they're, just
what? Wait. What is beyond geocaching?
Just getting around, yeah. So yeah, that's kind of because I tend to be a little bit of a cheapskate and try to get by with spending as little as I have to. But yeah, I feel like if you can get it for a couple bucks a day, then so that's kind of what I usually have a set target group of caches or a list of caches that I'm trying to go after, and those are usually the ones that I have loaded in. And so I don't really think about using data unless I end up finding what I want to find, and then I've got some extra time on my hands. So yeah, that's kind of how my planning usually goes.
And then you're using both the phone and a GPSR, correct? Or?
Yes, yeah, I usually do. I think rely more on the GPSR than on the phone. But when I was in Sweden and Denmark, I actually found that the maps that we had in the app were better than what I had loaded onto the GPSR. And so I had a little bit better access to trail maps than what I had on my GPS. So I found myself using the phone a little bit more. The other thing is that one of the things that I really like now in the app, in our app, is the drafts feature. And because I know that I know tons of people that use their GPS and they upload their notes and they log caches that way, but I just never got into that workflow. And so the way I'm doing it now that we have the drafts feature is I'll usually just open the cat, or I'll log, or I'll start a log just with a single letter and then save it, and then later I can go onto the website and finish all my logs. So that's kind of how I'm sure some sort of a version 1 way of doing it. I'm sure everybody else is on version 5, but it's.
I was going to say the thing that I really want from the drafts mode still is that, the field notes was the old name for it, is that submit all, so that I can upload everything and just, submit all of these now. And I don't have to go through and do them individually, because it can be a pain if you have like 100 caches.
So then, do you write your log then first? Like when you're in the field, do you write your log while you're in the field?
For the most part, yes.
Okay, because I usually don't, and so that's why the submit all might not work so well for me. I usually like to just do a single thing, and maybe I'll write a little note if I want to remember something about it, but remember something specific to write in the log. But usually it's so stupid when I'm thinking about it. It's so inefficient. But I'll get back and I have my drafts there. I'll click on one, and then I'll usually go to the cache page and maybe look at the hint, and that'll jog if I'm not remembering that cache. If for some reason it hasn't jogged my memory, I'll look at the hint, or I'll look at the cache description, and then it was that one, and then I'll type out what I'm going to type out. So yeah, it's a totally inefficient way to do it.
Yeah, but the cache owners appreciate the unique log instead of
found
this on day 3 of my trip.
Well, my old way of doing it back in the earlier days of Geosphere was I'd go and put some notes in on Geosphere. Then when we break for lunch, I'd go through and finish up the logs. And so when I got home or done with the caching for the day, I could just, quickly go through and make sure that everything was right and then hit submit all from within that app. So kind of the same thing I'm doing now, but I'm using more of that voice to text,
Yeah,
which can
right.
create some very interesting logs.
Yeah, I bet. But now, don't you need to have, do you have to have data to do voice to text?
Yes.
Okay, so I think
on
that's,
iOS you do.
yeah, I think that's what, because I had started doing that a little bit, maybe a month or two ago. I was like, oh, voice to text, I should start doing this. And so I did a few times. And then one time I was out of service and I tried it and I was like, oh, wait, you can't do this, without data. So it's kind of fallen back out of my workflow.
Yeah, Android, it's, I guess, dependent on the device. And if on some devices you have downloaded the dictionary.
Huh.
But it is possible to do the voice to text in device on some Android phones.
Interesting.
And meanwhile, White Coaster says that text entry on a eTrex 20 is painful. I wholeheartedly agree, and I don't think it's any better when you get into like the Oregon series.
No, he says the 750T is worse. He's not a fan of the Oregon operating system.
That's Limax, yes. Well,
Limax,
one of the problems I have with the Oregon is that none of the letters are anywhere that I would expect them. So I always have to stare at it. It's like, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not like a regular grid, but they're also so tiny that I never hit the right one.
Wet Coaster says he also writes a field note and then expands on it later for the actual submitted log. So, Chris, that's your same workflow there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a really common workflow.
We got a tip in the chat from David Levine. He says skyroam.com is a good option for international travel. $10 a day, unlimited, including device rental, can handle up to 5 concurrent connections. So if you're
look into that, yeah,
out and about, now you can go and get a device, or I'm sure you can also get a SIM for your current device, right? If you have an Android or iOS device, you could.
Yeah, that's GSM. That doesn't necessarily work in some countries, like in Asia. They're predominantly CDMA, and that might not work. So it can be quite the burden trying to figure out what the best way is for your individual trip.
Yes, it can. It may take a little research ahead of time to know what's more effective. Is it better to keep your cell phone and pay $10 a day, or to go get another one? From skyroam.com.
Yeah, I always feel like there's an easier and or cheaper way to do it probably, but that the research that it would require to figure out that easier or cheaper way is just, what I'll usually do is there's a handful of people at work that I feel like are 1,000 times smarter than me about this stuff, and I'll ask them, and they'll usually give me some suggestions that I immediately forget, and then I end up doing whatever is the simplest, which for me is to stick with my cell phone, my data plan, pay $10 a day, and be over with it. But yeah, I'll definitely look into some of this stuff that's being suggested there in the chat and check it out.
Chris, I love your honesty.
It's so crazy because I
and then I'll leave and go, wait a minute. Now, David Levine, he said something, but I can't remember what it is, so I'm not going to use it. That's why we do shows like this. Hopefully, eventually, something will stick.
People can forget it and not use it.
Yes, exactly.
Like, okay, good.
Oh, wait. I wasn't supposed to say that out loud, was I?
You're not supposed to admit that publicly. Anyway, one of the things that kind of impressed me is that on almost every one of these trips that I've heard you talk about, you are going with a local. So how do you actually make those connections ahead of time? Well,
I think that's maybe one of the best things about working where I work is that, and what my job is. A lot of my job is to interact with geocaching volunteers around the world. So I've gotten to know people in all parts of the world now. And so when, for instance, when I went to Brazil, one of our forum moderators was happy to meet me at the airport, and we spent the weekend together, and it was great. When I was in Sweden and Denmark earlier this year, the first part of the trip was strictly business. I was there to meet with the Nordic reviewer meeting was taking place, and so I was there for that meeting. And so we had reviewers from Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Finland and so forth. And so the Denmark folks, where the meeting was, they were excited to show us around and introduce us to different places. And then I had an opportunity to meet with Magnus from Project GC in the town where he lives in Sweden. And so we spent a day out caching together. And who better to guide me around a town in Sweden than Magnus from Project GC. And so those are kind of where those connections come from. And it's one of the perks that I have of working where I do. And the same thing when I was in France last year, it was also for a reviewer meeting. And so again, I had access to a bunch of people that spoke French or cachers, and were excited to show me around their area. So it's definitely, like I said, a little perk that I've tried to take advantage of and will continue to for as long as I'm allowed to.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that most cachers can take advantage of.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think that one of the great things about how open the game is becoming because of geocaching groups and what have you, is that what I've found is that if you're going to be going someplace, I've noticed this at least with people that come to Washington, they might drop into the Washington Geocachers Facebook group and say, hey, I'm going to be in such and such town. Does anybody have any suggestions of caches I should go get or whatever? And they almost always get tons of great suggestions. And so I think that's one of the things that I would suggest to people, is that if you're going to be going somewhere, is to, try to use Facebook and various geocaching groups and organizations. We have a big list of them on our website now, or a link to a big list of them, and try to use that as a resource too, as you're planning your travels.
Well, and Wet Coaster in the chat said that when he went to Hawaii last time, he contacted someone that had recently held an event in Maui, and that way he could get good contact from that.
That's a great idea. Absolutely. Yeah. When we went to Hawaii, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, and hosted an event in Honolulu, and I think something like 15 or 20 people showed up, and they all had a ton of suggestions about the caches that they really liked in the area, and that was an awesome way to learn more about the best places to go see.
Well, and that was an excellent tip we've had from several of the road cachers, was to hold an event. Do you have any tips on how to go about planning an event like that?
What I tend to do is I'll try to look at what events have been held in the area where I'm going, and see if I can get an idea of what good locations are. Or another thing I've done is I've contacted people that have hosted events in, like, for instance, I was in Florida back in February, and I hosted an event when I was there, and I think it was in Boca Raton. And so I looked at the events over the past 3 or 4 months, and I noticed that one person had hosted multiple events. And so I emailed her and I just said, hey, it looks like you live in the area. I'm going to be in town. I was hoping to host an event while I'm there. Is there a place that people do or don't like to go? I think I had a particular place in mind, and I just said, is this an area that would work, or is this something that the locals would kind of roll their eyes and say, gosh, why is this person making us go to this place for an event? So yeah, I try as much as possible to lean on the locals for that kind of information, because I want it to be a good event for them, as much as a good event for me, if not more. So I don't want to end up choosing a location or a day or a time that makes the people that are most likely to come say, oh God, it's some out of towner just inconveniencing us.
How true.
Excellent point.
Limax in the chat there says, look at the past events after they've been archived, and you can see some input there of is it a good spot or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it just gives you a great idea of what locations tend to be good in a certain area. You might think in your town people like to go to a certain restaurant, or maybe people like to go to a park or whatever, but that might not be the same for wherever it is that you happen to be going. So I try to respect the local norms as much as I can.
All right. Well, we are a little over 45 minutes, so we should probably wrap it up. But
Wow.
Any more good stories, maybe one that we should share before we take off?
Gosh, good stories.
No pressure. It's got to be a
no
good
pressure.
one.
Maybe that time that you pushed Ben off the boat and went back to shore.
Oh gosh, that's my dream story. Yeah, no, unfortunately or fortunately, Ben and I have not traveled together yet. I think probably one of my favorite travel stories was when I went to Hawaii last year, when we went to Hawaii, and one of my high school classmates lives on the Big Island. We hadn't seen each other since we graduated from high school, and we were in touch on Facebook, and he lives not too far from Mauna Kea on the Big Island, and big mountain, and I think it's 14,000 or 14,100 feet, something like that. And there's a webcam and an earth cache up there, and you can drive up there, but they recommend that you have four-wheel drive. Well, it turns out that my friend had a big pickup truck, and he said, sure, I'll drive you up to the top of Mauna Kea. But I also knew that they didn't allow cell phone use at the top, and there probably wasn't going to be a signal. So I had a friend of mine who's an IT pro basically set it up to where he would grab screenshots of the webcam. I think it was every 5 minutes or he had a certain interval set up, and I said, I'm going to be there, but somewhere in this 2-hour window. And so he set it up to where it would grab screenshots every 5 minutes or so for that 2 hours. So we just got up to the top and we stood in front of the webcam for I think 10 minutes just to be sure, and then walked over and got the earth cache, and it was this just beautiful. It was such a cool moment to not just get the caches, but be doing it with this guy that I haven't seen since I was 18 years old, and we just had a blast up there. And yeah, I think it's funny. That's kind of one of the favorite travel moments that comes up. But just in general, I mean, you guys know this, that caching, it just makes traveling such a fun thing. I mean, to me, it's such a compliment to travel, and I can't imagine how much I would have missed out on over the years while traveling if it wasn't for this hobby that we all have.
No, you nailed it. That's exactly right. Just when I was in Hawaii a year ago, used geocaching to get to some of the great spots that we didn't go to any other way. The tourist guides didn't tell us of these spots. So,
right.
Well, thanks so much for joining us and sharing a little bit of your travels and some tips.
Yeah, I don't know how many tips I really gave, but you know.
But you get tons of tips. Don't travel with Ben.
Yeah, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. I was just actually making fun of him today with Jamie, his wife. She probably would say that she wasn't making fun of him, but I felt like she was. Yeah, he was just in front of a whiteboard talking to a group of people, and he just didn't look smart at all. And I don't know what he was talking about, but people looked really bored when they were listening to him. And yeah, and Jamie was kind of watching from a distance. She looked kind of horrified that he was making a fool of himself in front of these people. And so I stopped and just tried to assure her that he wasn't as bad as he looked. And I don't know how if I was successful with that or not, but yeah, so that happened today, just like a few hours ago. Thanks for reminding me of that. That was.
Oh, you'll sleep well tonight, knowing that you've once again bested Ben.
Well, I got that off my chest, so that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me vent about him again.
Oh, anytime. Come on next week. We'll talk some more. I'm sure he'll embarrass himself by then as well.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll never get Ben back on this show now. Okay. But we are going to have other shows coming up, probably without Ben. Next week, we're talking one of my favorite types of shows, the randomize. This one is LIX or LIX, because you have to pronounce Roman numerals. August 3rd, we're talking again about puzzle caches. This is puzzle number 6. August 10th, we're doing another show on live streaming. August 17th, we're talking about Cachely 3.0, just came out. And August 24th, Going Caching 2017.
Check the Cachemaniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love to hear from our listeners, so leave us feedback by emailing geogearheads at cachemaniacs.com or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cachemaniacs shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cachemaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Offenauer and Daryl Wannberg. This show is copyright 2017 by Daryl Wannberg. All rights reserved.
Cash with a Cachemaniacs.